The story of Max and Sarah. Sarah lived in a small house on the outskirts of Chicago, where the streets were narrow and quiet, and the old houses were surrounded by green trees. She was an elderly woman with silver hair and kind, warm eyes that always smiled. Everyone in the neighborhood loved Sarah, not only for her kind-hearted nature but also because of her special bond with Max, a large German shepherd with glossy black fur and watchful eyes. Max wasn't just a dog to Sarah, he was her loyal friend and protector, always by her side. One day, as Sarah was taking a walk with Max, she noticed a change in his behavior. Max, usually calm and friendly, seemed tense. He kept stopping, sniffing the air, his ears perked up at every sound. Sarah couldn't understand why, but she couldn't deny that she too felt uneasy deep down. "Max, what's wrong with you today?" Sarah asked, gently patting his neck, trying to reassure him, but even with her soft words, Max's alertness didn't ease. He kept tugging her toward home as if he wanted to get her inside quickly. Sarah laughed, thinking maybe he could smell a change in the weather. "All right, let's just grab some bread and head back," she said as they entered the bakery. From inside, she noticed two men standing across the street. They seemed to be talking, but their eyes were fixed on her. Diego and Javier, strangers to Sarah, had a look that sent a chill down her spine. "It's probably nothing," she thought, trying to push the feeling away. Outside, Max was watching him too. His body was tense, his eyes fixed on the men. He let out a low growl. Sniffing the air, Diego nudged Javier and whispered, "She lives alone, just her and that dog. She seems like an easy target." Javier simply nodded, his eyes following Sarah as she stepped out of the bakery with a fresh loaf of bread in hand. As Sarah walked back, she noticed Max's uneasiness and felt a growing concern. "What is it, Max? You're acting like you've seen a ghost." She tried to brush it off, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. Hurrying her steps, she and Max returned home. As Sarah closed and locked the door behind them, she tried to convince herself that everything was fine. But when she looked down at Max, who remained at the door, tense and unwavering, she wondered if her loyal friend knew something she didn't. As they walked home, Sarah's sense of unease grew with every step. She could feel Max's tension, his body stiff, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings. She tried to ignore it, but the unsettling feeling followed her like a shadow. Once they finally reached home, Sarah locked the door and let out a sigh, hoping to shake off the nerves. But Max didn't relax. He remained standing, his gaze fixed on the front door as though expecting something to happen. A low growl rumbled from him, his fur bristling along his spine. Sarah could see his behavior was far from normal. "Max, what's gotten into you?" she asked, leaning down to pet him. "I've never seen you act like this." But Max didn't look at her. His focus was on the outside, as if sensing a threat lurking just beyond the door. Outside, hidden in the shadows of the alley across the street, Diego and Javier watched Sarah's house closely, their eyes sharp and calculating. Diego wore a dark, smug smile as he spoke in a low voice. "She's alone, just an old lady with her pet. What kind of trouble could she give us?" he murmured, laughing quietly. "That dog doesn't look very friendly," Javier replied, watching Max's silhouette through the window. "But if we get rid of him, the rest is easy." Diego nodded confidently. "We'll come back later, tonight, when it's quiet. She won't even know what hit her." Inside, Sarah tried to settle in with a book in her armchair, but she couldn't shake the memory of the two men watching her. Max wasn't helping. He was pacing near the door, stopping every few minutes to growl softly at any noise from outside, like he was ready for something. "Max, what's going on with you today?" Sarah asked, Closing her book with a sigh, she walked over to the door, trying to listen for anything unusual outside. But all she could hear was the gentle rustling of leaves and the quiet sounds of the night. "There's nothing out there, my friend," she said softly, trying to reassure herself as much as him. But the unease wouldn't leave her, and Max remained steady by the door, his eyes fixed and alert to any sign of movement. As Sarah turned off the lights to get ready for bed, she double-checked the windows and door locks. Max's posture made her believe that he knew something was coming, something she hadn't yet understood. Outside, Diego and Javier waited, watching the lights go out one by one. When the house was finally dark, Javier gave a grim smile. "There it is, Diego. All we have to do is wait." Diego's expression hardened, his voice cold and final. "Tonight, we're going in. They won't know what hit them." Inside, Max stayed by the door, his gaze unflinching as though sensing the real danger that was about to cross the threshold. And though Sarah couldn't fully grasp what lay ahead, a voice deep down told her this would be a night unlike any other. The early hours were silent when Sarah finally settled in bed, trying to rest, but Max wasn't interested in sleep. He remained in the hallway, his eyes locked on the front door, his fur on edge. The tension in the air was almost tangible, something Sarah could feel, even if she couldn't explain it. Suddenly, a soft sound came from outside, making Max go rigid. His growl was low and dangerous. Sarah, still half asleep, murmured, "Max, what is it now?" But before she could stand, she heard a sound that sent chills down her spine, the jiggling of metal against metal. Someone tampering with the lock. A loud crash shattered the quiet as the front door was forced open. Sarah let out a scream of pure terror as two masked men, Diego and Javier, charged into her home, their faces hard and menacing. "Stay quiet, lady," Diego shouted, a cruel smile twisting his face as he advanced towards Sarah. "We don't want to hurt you. Just hand over anything valuable." Sarah took shaky steps backward, her heart pounding as panic took hold. But Max didn't hesitate. With a ferocious growl, he launched himself at Diego, his jaws clamping down on the man's arm and dragging him to the ground. "That damn dog," Diego shouted, writhing on the floor as he tried to shake Max off. "Javier, get him off me." Javier lunged forward to pull Max away, but the dog turned on him with equal fury, forcing him to stumble back. Sarah, frozen with terror, watched the desperate fight. Max was relentless, attacking with fierce determination to protect her. "This dog's going to kill us," Javier yelled, pulling out a knife and aiming it at Max. "I'm going to put an end to this." But Max, driven by a fierce instinct to protect, didn't back down. He leaped again, biting Javier's arm and sending him reeling. Diego scrambled to his feet, trying to push past Max and get to Sarah. But Max blocked his path, standing firm with his teeth bared. His growl filled the room, fueled by a surge of adrenaline and fear. Sarah grabbed a heavy lamp and swung it at Diego, hitting him hard enough to make him stumble. Realizing they were no match for Max and Sarah's resistance, the two men exchanged panicked glances. "Let's get out of here. Diego, this dog's going to rip us apart," Javier shouted, clutching his injured arm as he backed toward the door. Diego, humiliated and furious, glared at Sarah one last time. His eyes were full of hatred. "This isn't over, old lady. We'll be back," he said, and with that, he and Javier fled into the night, disappearing into the darkness. Silence filled the house once more. Trembling, Sarah knelt beside Max, who was panting heavily but still watching the door as if expecting them to return at any moment. "Oh, Max, you saved me," she whispered, her hands shaking as she stroked her loyal friend's fur. I don't know what I would have done without you. Max, exhausted, lay down beside her. His body was still tense, his eyes vigilant. That night, Sarah realized Max was far more than just a companion, he was her true guardian. The next morning dawned quietly, but Sarah's heart was still racing. The memory of the break-in felt like a nightmare. Yet the broken door and the bruises on her hands reminded her it had been real. In the kitchen, Max rested, but even in his exhaustion, his ears stayed alert, his gaze focused, ready to react to any suspicious sound. After drinking a cup of coffee to steady her nerves, Sarah picked up the phone and called the police. Her voice shook as she described the two men and the terrifying attack that Max had so bravely fought off. 2 officers arrived shortly after to take her statement. Max sat beside her, watching him closely, distrustful of any unfamiliar face or movement. Officer Felipe, a kind-faced man, listened carefully, and once Sarah finished, he gave Max an approving look. "This dog is a true hero," he said, kneeling to pet Max. "Not many dogs would fight like this to protect someone." Sarah, feeling a surge of pride, stroked Max's fur, her hand gentle but firm. "He's more than a hero," she replied with a small, heartfelt smile. "He's my family." The second officer, however, adopted a more serious tone. "We understand that your dog acted bravely, ma'am, but those men may come back. They know you live alone, and that might encourage them to try again. We recommend adding more locks and, if possible, installing an alarm system." Sarah nodded, a mix of worry and relief in her expression. "I'll do whatever it takes. I need to feel safe again." In the following days, Sarah took every precaution. She hired a technician to reinforce her locks and install a security alarm. Each time the doorbell rang, she felt a tightness in her chest, an ever-present alertness that wouldn't allow her to fully relax. Max, for his part, seemed to feel the same way. He continued patrolling the house, moving from room to room, and each time he heard a sound or saw movement outside, he would pause and let out a low growl. Sarah watched her loyal friend, sensing that he knew the danger wasn't entirely gone. Meanwhile, in a distant alley, Diego and Javier were nursing their bruises and discussing the failed attempt. Diego, his arm still bandaged and his face twisted in anger, looked over at Javier, who wore a similarly grim expression. "That dog ruined everything," Diego spat, gritting his teeth. "Who would have thought he'd be so aggressive? He's just a dog, he's not invincible," Javier replied, rubbing his injured shoulder. "Next time, we'll be ready. We won't let him get in our way again." Diego's eyes hardened as he looked at his partner, his voice cold and determined. "Exactly. This time, we go in and deal with him first. The old lady won't stand a chance." That night, Sarah finished tidying up the kitchen, but an uneasy feeling lingered. Max, as if sensing her thoughts, stood by her side, his eyes fixed on the door. A low growl rumbled from his chest. She knelt beside him, gently scratching his neck, trying to reassure them both. "It'll be okay, Max. We're prepared now. They won't come back, right?" Max's dark eyes, intense and unwavering, seemed to say that if they did return, he would be there to protect her no matter the cost. In that moment, Sarah knew that Max's presence was her only source of courage for whatever might come next. The cold, silent early hours of the morning settled over Chicago as Sarah tried to find rest. Though an unease lingered, Max, as he had done every night, stayed in the hallway, his eyes locked on the front door, his body tense. There was a heaviness in the air, a feeling Sarah sensed, even if she couldn't fully understand it. Suddenly, she heard a faint noise outside, a quiet shuffle that made Max go rigid. His growl was low and menacing. Half asleep, Sarah murmured, "Max, what is it now?" But before she could stand, a sound sent a wave of fear through her, the sharp clinking of metal as someone fumbled with the lock. A loud crash shattered the quiet as the front door was forced open. Sarah's scream filled the room as Diego and Javier stormed in, their expressions cold and determined. "Playtime's over, old lady," Diego shouted, gripping a metal rod in his hand. "Did you really think we'd give up so easily?" Sarah took a step back, her heart racing. "Please leave. I called the police last time. You'll regret this." Javier just laughed, pulling out a knife as he moved toward her slowly. "Not this time. We're not leaving empty-handed." Without hesitation, Max launched himself at Diego. His fierce growl filled the room as he clamped down on Diego's arm, knocking him to the ground. Sarah, terrified, watched as Max fought bravely, her mind racing for a way out. But her worry for Max left her frozen in place. "That damn dog!" Diego screamed, writhing on the floor as he tried to shake Max off. "Javier, do something!" Javier, holding the knife, tried to strike Max, but the dog, moving quickly, dodged the blade and lunged at him, pushing him back against the wall. Max was relentless, his only focus to protect Sarah at any cost. Seeing a chance, Sarah grabbed the phone and dialed the police. Her voice trembling, she cried, "Please come quickly, they're here, they're trying to hurt me." She looked back. Max continued to fight with every ounce of strength he had. Javier, now panicked and bleeding, yelled, "Diego, let's get out of here. This dog is going to kill us." But Diego, furious and desperate, charged forward with the metal rod. Before he could strike, Max lunged again, knocking him down and disarming him for good. Red and blue lights began flashing outside as the police arrived. Realizing time was up, Diego and Javier tried to flee, but the officers stormed in, weapons drawn, ordering them to the ground. One of the officers rushed to Sarah, who was kneeling beside Max, sobbing with relief and gratitude. "It's okay now, ma'am, thanks to this dog, we were able to catch them," the officer said. Sarah, still shaking, stroked Max's fur, her hands trembling. "You're my hero, Max, my hero," she whispered, her voice full of emotion as she held her loyal companion close. When morning finally arrived, sunlight streamed through Sarah's house, illuminating the marks left by the struggle but bringing a sense of peace and safety she hadn't felt in a long time. The nightmare was over. The police had taken Diego and Javier into custody, and Sarah knew that Max, with his bravery and loyalty, had secured her safety. As she gently petted Max, tears welled in her eyes. He was exhausted, with a few scratches, but he watched her with that same protective gaze. In that moment, she realized that no words would ever be enough to express her gratitude. Later, 2 officers returned to take her full statement and check on her well-being. Seeing Max, Officer Felipe, who had been following the case from the start, approached with a look of admiration. "Miss Sarah, we'd like you to bring Max to the station. Our chief wants to recognize what he did. He deserves a medal for bravery." Sarah looked at Max, tears of pride filling her eyes as she gently touched his head. "A medal? You deserve the world, my friend," she whispered, smiling warmly. That afternoon, Sarah brought Max to the station, where the officers had arranged a small ceremony in his honor. Police officers and some neighbors who had heard about the incident gathered to see the hero dog who had saved his owner from a terrible fate. The police chief placed a gleaming medal around Max's neck and addressed everyone present. "This dog is not just a hero to his owner. He's an example of courage and loyalty to all of us. On behalf of our community, we thank him for his brave actions." Sarah, holding back tears, watched with pride as Max received the recognition he so deserved. Applause filled the room, and Max, always serious, sat beside her like a true guardian. That night, back home, Sarah prepared a special dinner for Max, a hearty, delicious meal worthy of a hero. While he ate, she sat in her old armchair, watching him and reflecting on everything they had been through together. Max was more than just a dog, he was her strength, her support, her courage. Several neighbors stopped by to offer words of comfort and appreciation, including Mrs. Clara, who brought a homemade cake and a bottle of wine. "Sarah, we all know what Max did for you. He's not just your hero now, he's a hero to all of us," Mrs. Clara said. Sarah smiled, deeply moved. "Yes, Max is special. He always has been. Now he's the protector of all of us." When night fell, Sarah and Max settled together on the porch under a starry sky. Max, still wearing the shiny medal around his neck, rested his head on her lap. Finally at peace, she stroked his fur, feeling safe, protected, and overwhelmingly grateful. "My dear Max," Sarah whispered, "you're more than a hero. You're my family, my friend, and I know that with you by my side, nothing will ever shake us." Under the quiet night sky, as a gentle breeze drifted by, Sarah and Max sat in silence, enjoying their well-earned peace with the certainty that, together, they were unstoppable.